Hello and welcome to Esoteric Discussions with me, your host, Valentine St. Aubin, a show where we go deep down into the rabbit hole. You can catch me every other Wednesday evening from 9 here on Peterborough FM and online. If you want to learn more about me, please visit my website at www.valentinesaintaubin.co.uk. So it's the 19th of October 2011, and this is a special edition of Esoteric Discussions, and it's Black History Month. Did you know? Have you had any Black History events or activities in your town? We've had a couple of things here in Peterborough, in the Peterborough area, but I have to say I don't think very much has really been going on. I am going to be doing my bit, however, and I'll be giving a talk next Wednesday on the 26th of October at Peterborough Central Library. It's called Black History, Black Heroes, and I will be introducing a few themes about Black history. It's free, so you don't have to pay, so if you are in the neighbourhood, please pop in. Peterborough Central Library usually puts on a small display in the library for Black History Month, but they never usually organise any talks. So I've managed to talk them into this. It's a new thing, and they are being very supportive with it. And I know that they're interested in terms of the foot traffic. So if you can, please do try to support the talk next week. So, well, we're about 2 months away from the infamous year of 2012. We have been inundated through, mostly via Hollywood, as to the world ending. But unfortunately, I don't think that's happening anytime soon. It would be nice, actually. I have to say, sometimes this planet just does my head in. But there's been lots of talk about things beginning to take off. A lot of people have been expecting the bottom of the economy to fall out at about this time now. I don't personally see this happening until a couple of more years, and I'm going to explain my reasonings for that. I do think that there is certainly quite a lot going on, and although there is a lot going on, but of course, the corporate news outlets aren't giving us the full picture. So we're getting bits and pieces of information. We're not getting the full story as to the dissatisfaction that people are feeling out there. It's only for so much longer that they can keep that game going. The movements, the protests are getting louder and bigger and stronger. So, the bottom hasn't fallen out just yet, but it is close. And as Joel Salente says, it's hard to predict how they will keep the Pansy scheme going, but we do know the eventual outcome, and the eventual outcome is, the current system as we know it is going to crumble in the Western countries. That is definitely coming. So if we look at the astrology of what is going on, then we can really see where things are going and what the timeline is. As I've said in other shows, we are having a transit of Pluto in Capricorn. Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, and soon after it entered Capricorn, we had the global meltdown. Capricorn rules the structures of things. This includes world governments, economies, political structures, anything to do with the foundations. That basically falls under the domain of the sign of Capricorn. Capricorn is also an earth sign, so it of course rules the structures of the planet Earth. So, we're having reports of infrastructures collapsing. Now, I mentioned this before in a previous show, and again, I'm going to mention it again, because there's been quite a bit of this, I have to say. This example I'm going to use was the bridge in Minneapolis that collapsed, I think it was a couple of years ago now. And there's actually a very, very excellent picture of the bridge, literally just sort of folded into two. And no one can explain why, but the bridge just sort of buckled in on itself. So that's just one example. A lot of people have been talking about the strange noises they're hearing the Earth is making. They're hearing sounds of trumpets with the Earth, with the plates within the Earth moving. There's a lot of things going on out there, people, and the newspapers aren't really picking up on it, and definitely the television news is not going to report it. But there's a lot of Earth changes afoot, and a lot of climate issues going on. I was recently abroad in the States last week, and just as we were having, this heat wave in October, they were having a heat wave as well. And obviously these temperatures are not, they're not what we would expect for the month of October. So again, lots of strange things going on with the climate, lots of strange things going on within the Earth itself, and of course the collapsing of our structures with the economy and political issues also coming up to the surface. These are all things that fall under the domain of Capricorn. We're having, again, also very intense earthquakes. This year we've seen quite a few earthquakes hitting the 8.8, 8.9, 9.0 on the Richter scale. Again, it's not unheard of, but not so many in 1 year. And of course, earthquakes in general have been intensifying over the last few years. There's a map that you can go to that you can look at, and it shows you all of the earthquakes that take place, in any given time period. And it's just off the charts. There's just so much activity going on, and it's going to keep increasing. This is not going to go away. It's going to keep increasing. So, and the other thing to look out for are volcanic eruptions. We had this last year with Iceland. Now, volcanoes always go off. They go off, Indonesia sees volcanoes going off all the time. That's nothing new. But when you get countries like Iceland having their volcanoes going off, well, it's kind of a bit of a quandary for European countries, and that's exactly what we had last year, and it was unprecedented when they closed down the airspace, which had never been done before, except during wartime. So, we're going to be having more and more of these types of things, and, as I say, this is not going to be going away anytime soon. Pluto is in Capricorn until 2024. And just in case if you don't know your mythology, Pluto is the lord of the underworld, and he's also known as Hades. So, when we think of Pluto, there's many ways that we can understand his character. There's always a theme of illegal activity, secretiveness, and control issues, power issues. When you're dealing with Pluto, there's also some kind of transformative lesson that has to be overcome when you're dealing with a Plutonic type transit as well. He's a very difficult planet to have, and when he's moving in such a powerful sign like Capricorn, there's no way that you can actually ignore him, because he will let you know of his presence. Also the other thing about Pluto is, in terms of our whole systems, is as we go through this transit, as we go through Pluto going through Capricorn, we're going to see just how corrupt our banking system truly is. Now, we've touched on the surface of it. As I said, Pluto went into Capricorn in 2008, and already quite a lot has happened. There's still more information to come out. So as Pluto goes through the different degrees of Capricorn, I believe at the moment he's only about 5 degrees into Capricorn. He has a good 26, 27 more degrees to go through. We're going to be learning a lot more. And we're also going to be learning a lot more about our political systems, about our politicians as well. There's a lot of information to come up to the surface in those regards as well. So there's a lot to take on board there. And, a lot of things will be hitting the surface. And another thing about Pluto to note is that, he was a very vengeful and controlling god. So, we're seeing it already But many of our governments are going to be taking more and more of our rights away as we begin to demand more. We're seeing that in the Middle East with the Middle East uprisings, and we will begin to see it in the US and the UK as more people now take to the streets and demand more to be done about the banking system. I think I just saw, yes I did, I think it was yesterday, I saw on the news the two young lads who said something on their Facebook page and now have been charged for inciting the public. And they took that to the Court of Appeals. The appeals have actually been thrown out. So they're going to be serving time for stating their opinion on their Facebook page. So again, we're going to be seeing a lot more of these types of things as the years go on. Issues of control, the police state will come into force in bigger ways than ever before. So when the planet Pluto moves through any sign, it always signifies that a transformation must take place. It's usually a transformation by fire or chaos, and it certainly is never an easy change. So there will be some very dark days ahead of us to come. And I want to just state that as well, state that very clearly. We are moving into some very difficult times, into some very difficult years. And you're going to have your head sorted out. We've only had 3 years of Pluto and Capricorn at the moment. There's quite a few more years to go. As I said, he's going to be there. He's going to be in Capricorn until 2024. So effectively, we have about 13 more years of global instability. And as astrology is a quantifiable science, we should be able to see some kind of pattern of how things operate. So if I look back through the annals of time and use an example, let's say if I use an example like Pluto in Sagittarius. Pluto was in Sagittarius from 1995 to 2008, and we had the War on Terror during those years. And the highlight of that period was 9/11. Sagittarius is a philosophical sign. It rules higher education, religious beliefs, and foreigners, just to name a few of the things that it rules. So 9/11 took place in 2001 while the planet Pluto was in Sagittarius, and it was about halfway through the sign and at the crescendo point. And I use that term myself because I've noticed when planets go through a sign, the energy has to build, and I would say that the energy definitely built by 2001 as Pluto was moving through Sagittarius. And of course there was a lot more that met the eye with 9/11, which we're now finding out as the years roll by. There was a very shadowy element of illegal activity. And the 9/11 Truth Movement have been trying to raise their concerns and their issues to the public, as well as many other groups as well. Aviators, all types of people have jumped on board to try to get the truth out as to what they feel 9/11 actually was, if it was real, if it could be done, was it something done from the inside? These are all questions that have come up since 9/11. So, we're seeing, again, the Pluto in Sagittarius, Pluto giving that ego shadowy element, and the Sagittarius side with the religious fervor, and it coming out through, just basic terror, which Pluto can be quite terrifying. So, as I've said all of this to point out that from my point of view, I believe the crescendo point for Pluto and Capricorn is going to be between about 2014 to 2015. Now, we could have 2013 in there as well, but I really think the bottom's going to fall out around 2014, and we are currently not too far off from this period. I'm of the opinion that the Western economies of England, and the US included, have another 2 years before the game is truly up. In the meantime, the sound level of dissatisfaction will continue to increase. The earth changes will also become more and more severe, And I wouldn't be surprised if the earth changes become the brick that breaks the camel's back, with things really hitting their peak of collapse in a couple of years. So that's my take on things. So, we have a bit of time for people to get their heads sorted out. You need to be clear within yourself. It's time for many people to grow up and stop believing in what they're seeing and falling into this, Obama good, Republicans bad camp, and realize that it's a big game and, there's not really much choice between the game, and really they all need to go. Let's just be honest. There's still quite a bit of growing and awakening that people on this planet have to go through. So very difficult times that we're in, and we're all in it together. I'm not of the mind that it's the end of the world. I don't believe that at all. I do believe, however, that there are new times to come, and those who survive are going to survive because they've got their heads screwed on, because they have their eyes open, and because they're ahead of the game and they're anticipating. So that's my thoughts on that. I'll be talking more about these kind of themes in upcoming shows. We're coming to the end of the year now, and I'm already looking for my next few guests for next year, and I'm hoping to have a few financial experts on in 2012. I'm really hoping for someone like Joe Salente or Max Kaiser to join me. Now, that would be brilliant, wouldn't you think? Max Kaiser or Joe Salente? I know Gerald gives a lot of interviews, and I think I could probably pull it off. So we'll have to watch this space, as they say. So it's Black History Month, as I said earlier in the show, and tonight I'm going to be continuing my theme on Black history. I'm going to be joined by Dr. Hakim Adi, who has done a lot of pioneering work in Black British history. He's going to be introducing us to the historical context of Black British history, how far it goes back here in the UK. So it's going to be another great show. Last week, I did a couple of musical tributes. One was for Jimi Hendrix, and the other was for Jill Scott-Heron, who died earlier this year. So I'm going to continue with this theme as we go into our first break, and it's going to be a musical tribute to the artist known as Prince, who is actually one of my favorite artists. Now, I can play Prince on the radio, there's no problem with that, but I can't actually play his music on YouTube, because basically what they'll do is because I upload this show up to YouTube as well, and they'll just pull the show. They'll just take the show off the air, or they'll take the sound away. They'll do something to mess with it. So to avoid all of that, I have decided not to play any songs directly by Prince, to respect his own views, because he's got quite a lot to say about how he feels how music is going, and how free downloads affects the artist in general, and I understand his argument. So out of respect for him, I'm not going to put his music in my show tonight and then upload it onto YouTube. But what I am going to do is I'm going to play music from the family of Prince, because he found a lot of talent. And that's what people always forget with Prince. He's a great artist, he's a great songwriter, he's a great musician, but he also discovered a lot of musical talent as well. And some of it you may never have heard of, because it was in a certain, it's from a certain time period, very much within the Black community as well. The early sounds of Prince, very much within the Black community. So you may not know some of these people. So hopefully I might introduce something new to you. Prince was born on the 7th of June, 1958 in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which makes him a Gemini. His father was a musician and his mother was a singer. Prince was signed at the age of 19 to Warner Brothers. Actually, I think he might have been younger. I think he might have been actually 17 or 18, but I know by 19 he was with Warner Brothers. And he was given a contract to produce 3 albums. Now, Prince can play every instrument under the sun. However, there was a stipulation on the contract which did not allow him to produce himself, which is what he wanted to do. But what they did allow instead was for him to sign and give license to talent and get them signed up with Warner Brothers. And so that's exactly what he did. One of the first bands he signed was a group called The Time. Now, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Purple Rain, but Morris Day was the character who was a bit cheeky and a bit of a pimp kind of character. Well, Morris Day is a very old friend of Prince's, and he's actually a drummer, but he became the lead singer of The Time. So Prince put together this band. He gave them their name. So it was Morris Day, who was the lead singer. And by the way, Morris Day and Prince attended the same high school. I think they went to junior high together as well. They go back a very, very long way. Prince's other good friend was Andre Simone, who Prince lived with for quite some time. And I actually believe they're cousins, because if you've ever seen Andre Simone, he looks just like Prince. He sounds just like Prince. And again, he's very musically inclined. Now, Andre Simone was not in The Time, but again, he's a very old childhood friend of Prince, and he was part of Prince's backing group in the very, very early days. But back to The Time, the band that Prince put together. The other members who ended up being in it were, Terry Lewis, who was on the bass, Jelly Bean Johnson on the drums, Jimmy Jam, who was on the keyboards, as well as Monty, who was the only white guy in the band, and Jesse Johnson, who is an incredible guitarist, was on the guitar. And there's a really good story with Jesse Johnson, which I'll keep very short, but basically Prince heard of Jesse Johnson. Jesse Johnson doesn't come from Minneapolis. All of the other band members, they all knew each other. They went to school with each other, but Jesse Johnson didn't. He came from somewhere else, and he was a fabulous guitarist. And you know how controlling and difficult Prince can be. Well, he heard a tape of Jesse Johnson playing, and he said, that's fine. You do not have to audition for me. You're perfect as you are. So that's saying quite a lot. But Jesse Johnson was an incredible, and still is, an incredible guitarist. So that's The Time. The Time went on to do many different things. Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis went on to be great producers. They produced Janet Jackson, as well as a few other artists, and quite a lot of talent coming out of the Minneapolis scene. And it's very strange because it's Minnesota. You know what goes on in Minnesota. But there you have it. They were all there as kids, and they grew up together, and they played in bands with each other. And people say a lot of things about Prince, but he went on and he signed many of his friends. He signed Morris Day, put him on the lead vocals when he didn't have to. So there you have it. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to be joined by Hakim Adi, but we're going to go to a song by The Time. This is a great track. It's called Girl, and we'll be back after this break. So my guest tonight is Dr. Hakim Adi, and he is a university lecturer, and he has written several books during his long career. Here are just a few to get you interested. West Africans in Britain, 1900 to 1960. Nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and Communism. That's published by Lawrence and Wishart in 1998. The 1945 Pan-African Pan-African Manchester Congress Revisited, co-written with Merica Sherwood and published by New Beacon in 1995. And also Pan-African History, Political Figures from Africa and the Diaspora since 1787, and that was published by Routledge in 2003. Hakim was a founder member and for many years the chair of the Black and Asian Studies Association, also known as BASA. He has appeared in documentaries and radio programs and has written widely on the history of Pan-Africanism, the African diaspora, and Africans in Britain, including 3 history books for children. All right, so I'm going to open up Hakim's mic. Are you with us at the moment, Hakim? Are you there?
Yes.
Well, at least that's working.
Yep.
Well, thanks for being with us here tonight. I know you're a very busy man, especially at this time of year as well. So thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
So let's begin the interview with maybe you just telling us how you got involved in, researching this history, Black British history, Black history in general. I'm sure that it wasn't the easiest road to walk down because, there's been many resources, over the years written, but it's been a long road to try to get this kind of information out. So how did you get into it? How did it start for you?
It started for me when I was a teenager, I guess, and I suppose I just started to investigate things for myself. At that time, I'm going back into the mists of time, into the, what would it be, the early 1970s, I guess, that kind of time, when it was quite difficult to find out anything much about the history of Africa or the history of Africans. And I really started reading and researching for myself, and then decided that I needed to study further, so looked for a university or place where I could study. And then one thing led to another. To cut a long story short, I began to look into, I was particularly interested in the history of West Africa and West Africans, but I was also interested in West Africans abroad, particularly in Britain. So that began my research into West Africans, Nigerians, Ghanaians, and others in Britain during the early part of the 20th century. And that led to other things, I guess. My involvement with, then it became clear that there was very little written on that subject, and very little written on Africans, people of African origin in general, in this country. So although, in places like the US and elsewhere, people not only study African history, but the history of the African diaspora, and there are courses in Black Studies or Africana Studies, as it's sometimes called. There was nothing like that here. And I think that then prompted me and others, Marika Sherwood and others, to continue researching the subject, and also to set up BASA, or the original forerunner of BASA, over 20 years ago now, to try and encourage more people to study the subject, to kind of campaign that it should be taught in schools, that, at that time it was possible for people to study African American history, for example, as part of their school curriculum, but it wasn't possible for people to study the history of Africans, or African and Caribbean people in Britain. So we thought it was crazy, and so began to work to encourage that, to encourage people to study, to do more research ourselves, to write, and to promote as far as we could that kind of history. And so it's that then led me to writing the children's books and writing other books and speaking and teaching and things that I do.
So, in terms of your studying, as you were just giving us a bit of the background, when you were doing, when you were doing your undergraduate study and then going on to do your postgraduate study, did you find the lecturers at the higher education level open to where you were trying to go in terms of finding more about this type of history? Did you find the door quite closed? As a student, what was your experience? Because I know my experience going into the early 90s at that level, as you say, they're very quick to teach you about African American history. A lot of work's been done with that, and they're quite open to discussing that side of history. But in terms of history taking place here in the UK, they didn't really know very much. So what was your experience, just as a student? I mean, because you're coming from a different time as well, when you were, being a teenager and someone studying, I'm assuming it was around, the late 70s, early 80s during that time. So what was it like in the UK during that time period in terms of the accessibility of this type of information?
Well, there wasn't that much information. I mean, my background is in African history. That's really what I studied. So my grounding is in the history of Africa. I think the difficulty there was not so much in terms of finding information, but being encouraged to continue as a historian and to undertake research, or to be encouraged to undertake research. I don't think there was very much encouragement in that area. And if you look at the latest figures, I think a report came out yesterday on the numbers of black academics in Britain. It's extremely low numbers, like whatever it is, 1% or 0.5% or something. So that situation hasn't changed from when I was an undergraduate. When I was an undergraduate there, and I went to a very well-known I went to SOAS, School of Oriental and African Studies, and at that time there weren't any African lecturers at SOAS. I don't think there were even any Africans teaching African languages at that time. So that was the kind of environment that we developed in. So you couldn't say that it was encouraging or supporting, although there may have been individual teachers who were positive, but the general environment was not. I remember when I was probably in my first or second year, we somehow found out that by some coincidence, there was a visiting African American professor, a woman professor, whose entrance into SOAS hadn't been announced. She was a geographer, I think, and we stumbled on her by accident. And this was, I remember it to this day. I mean, this is over 30 years ago. I mean, it was like an amazing day for us that here was a black professor. We'd never come across a black professor before.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that was the kind of environment. So it was more a question of, if you like, overcoming that and really just carrying on, deciding. And my own history is quite a complicated history because I was an undergraduate and then I left, and then I came back and did research later and so on. So I think the thing is you just have to kind of persevere with something that you love or you want to do or you think is important. But certainly the environment wasn't necessarily as encouraging as it might have been.
Yeah. So you went on as years passed, and as you were saying, as you were giving your introduction, you helped to co-found what's known as BASA, Black and Asian Studies Association, with a colleague of yours, Marika Sherwood. She's one of the co-founders as well. Tell us a bit more about that story, because I never actually knew the background as to how it all came together. How many others were there? Was it just the two of you that founded BASA? Were there more?
There were a few other people who, I mean, essentially what happened is that Marek and I met, I guess, around about 86, 87, something like that. At that time, there had been, earlier in the 80s, there had been a couple of conferences on kind of black, what we could call Black British history. And there were one or two people working in the field, but the problem was there was no consistent organization or nothing being done on a consistent basis in terms of research or encouraging people to take an interest in this subject. So I mean, we got talking and kind of decided that it'd be good to set something up, some body to encourage more work, more research, more interest in the subject. And we gathered various people around us and held one or two, kind of informal meetings with people, suggesting that we kind of set something up. And people kind of said or it was maybe a good idea, but didn't really do anything about it. So, I mean, we just went ahead and organized something, set up the association, and then, from the earliest days, from 91, I think, it published a newsletter, which was at first just a few pages, and then it kind of developed from there to organizing conferences and organizing seminars and workshops for teachers and lobbying, the Department of Education and so on and so forth. So it just kind of grew, again, by just keeping on and doing it. And both of us, in our own way, I guess, are kind of tenacious in that sense. You just, something that has to be done, it's important to do it, and you just keep plugging away at it. Sometimes there are successes, sometimes there are setbacks.
Yeah.
And over the years, obviously, other people have become involved, and there have been changes. If you look at national curriculum today, it's not perfect by any means, but it's certainly better than it was 20 years ago.
And is that because of the influence of BASA?
I would say so. I mean,
because I know you were quite vocal in trying to, change the national curriculum, get some of this information into the schools. So, are you happy with what you're seeing with the curriculum in terms of this history?
There are obviously there are still problems because of the way national curriculum is developed. I mean, one of the problems is that teachers are not taught this history. So if you go to a university today, or you undertake teacher training, you will get a general training in how to teach, or general training how to teach history, but you won't be given particular training in the content of that history you're teaching.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. So we're still, in fact, at the moment, we're involved in establishing a project with colleagues at the Institute of Education in London and the Black Cultural Archives and others to establish a project which will provide training for teachers in the terms of the content of Black British history, and will also hopefully offer something like an MA, so some people can actually come and study in more detail. So that project will be launched in a couple of weeks' time, actually, the 8th of November at the Institute of Education. So if any of your listeners want to have an evening in London, they should come to the Institute of Education 6 till 8 on the 8th, and they'll find out all about the project. We're launching it there, and we need to involve people, raise some funds, get people involved. But that's one of the things that BASA and the other organisations is trying to do. So, there are steps forward in terms of what's happening in schools, what's going on in museums, what's going on in terms of archives. archives and archival collections and so on, but it's still early days. And one of the great problems we have is that in higher education, generally speaking, this history isn't taught.
Yes, I mean, they like to teach the colonial side of the history, a bit of imperialism, and if you're lucky, maybe a bit of post-colonialism. But in saying that, it's quite general, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I know that when you were, you've been a university lecturer, you were actually able to have a few courses where you were teaching this type of information within the history department. How did your colleagues feel about that? Were they quite supportive? Was that difficult to establish that?
I don't think it was. I don't think it was difficult to establish. I taught African history, Caribbean history, history of African and Caribbean people in Britain for the best part of 15 years, I suppose. But teaching history, it has its own complexities and problems because of the whole way in which higher education is funded, problems of competition between all the universities, particularly in London and so on. So the courses, it's not just that the courses I used to teach no longer exist, it's the whole history department I used to be in no longer exists.
Yes, yeah.
So that meant that the courses came to an end. But I'm happy to announce on air that I've just got a new post. So hopefully from the new year,
okay, that's
some of
good.
these courses will be established again. But I mean, I'm one of the few people teaching them. I'm not saying that in any way to boast about what I'm doing, but to highlight the fact that throughout most universities, these kinds of courses, just about the history of African and Caribbean people in Britain, are not taught at all. So there's no, somebody may go to a school where these aspects of the national curriculum are taught to them. They're lucky enough to be taught about it in school, perhaps even if it's only minimal. Yeah. They might be interested. They say, let me go to university and study. Well, they can't. There's nowhere really for them to go and to take that kind of history course. So that's a problem. Yeah. And as I say, it's particularly a problem in the training of teachers, that teachers are not getting that training in terms of content and sources and so on and so forth. So that's still a problem that has to be solved.
So let's just, so that the audience that are listening, some may know a bit about this type of history, Black British history, some may not. It's a very short amount of time, obviously, but let's just give a bit of background as to the history here in the UK. How far back do the sources go in terms of referring to black peoples, including Asian as well, Asian people in England?
We can go back 2,000 years or thereabouts. Africans were here before the English were here.
Yeah.
If we go back to Roman times, we have Africans who were here. I mean, people may be familiar with some of the latest archaeological discoveries in York, which I think are, things which come out in the last year or so. But Britain was ruled by, in fact, two Africans, the most famous of whom was Septimus Severus, who was rather interestingly, in the light of current events, was a Libyan. And he was not only Emperor of Libya and Emperor of Britain, but Emperor of Rome. And he brought with him African troops to Britain, and he died in York nearly 2,000 years ago. So we can go back that far. As far as research in the centuries after that, there's not very much research done in the period before around about 1500. But there was certainly an African presence here during that time. Obviously, in the period with the expansion of England overseas from the Tudor times, then we find the presence of African people and Asian people continuously continuously throughout the last 500 years, obviously connected particularly with, let's say, England's expansion overseas and empire, colonialism, the enslavement of people and so on. Although even during the 16th century, certainly most of the Africans who were here were not enslaved people; they were free people.
And this is one of the things that tend to confuse people. They just always assume that when you're talking about black history in this sense that we're always slaves, and that's not a full reflection of what was going on in the past, is it?
No, it's definitely not. I mean, it is an important area of shared history, you can say, as far as Britain and Africa is concerned, but it's only one aspect of that history. And as I said, with giving the example of Septimus Severus, there were Africans here who were rulers or who even ruled the country. But there were African and Asian people here who were rulers, who were merchants, who were politicians, who were political activists, who were musicians, who were soldiers, sailors. Every kind of aspect of British life you could find, especially in the last 500 years, you probably find somebody of African or possibly of Asian descent occupying a range of occupations. And in towns and villages up and down the country, again, people tend to think that, this is just, a few major cities or a few ports.
Yes.
But actually, all the evidence suggests that so I say towns and villages up and down the country, you'll find, particularly during the last 500 years, some people of African origin or of Asian origin. So that history is important. It's really a question of not trying to, to ethnically cleanse history, to exclude people from history, that you just tell the history as it is.
Yes, and not hide it, yeah.
Yeah, not hide it. And of course some people were, particularly important at particular times. They played a particularly important role in, the major political campaigns and major political events in Britain's history. Like, one of the major events of the 18th century was the struggle in Britain against enslavement and the slave trade. Probably the biggest political campaign in Britain's history. And so Africans, played a leading role in that.
And again, that's been misrepresented as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, people often say history is written by the victors or the winners or the dominant classes in society, just as if you watch the news or you read the newspapers, it's often written by, or it provides the perspective of those who are the most powerful and the wealthy in society. People don't present in newspapers, generally speaking, the kind of things you were talking about before the break.
Oh, definitely, and that's part of what this show is about. It's about hidden information, basically, which is, there's quite a lot of it in all types of areas, and black history can fall very much within the umbrella of esoteric discussions, because it is a history that we can call them the powers that be. They'd rather keep people not to know about them than to educate them about these things, because then they have to change the landscape of how they present the world to the to the public. So there's many reasons for why they want to withhold information.
No, exactly, and that whole distortion of the historical past is obviously a very important weapon in keeping people unenlightened, uneducated, unconscious, if you like, and it makes it very difficult to draw the appropriate lessons from history if the history you're presented with is distorted, truncated, hidden, and so on. So that's why I say it's very important that we have the whole history, warts and all, if you like, and then we draw the appropriate conclusions from it. look at the events of the past, look at the struggles of the past, how they were waged, their successes, their failures, and so on. And the fact that, it's the majority of people who are the most important figures and players in history. If we're talking about the abolitionist campaign in the 18th century, for example, it's always almost synonymous with the name of Wilberforce, who it's not presented as something which millions of people up and down the country were involved in.
Excellent information that he shared with us tonight. But that's it for tonight, I'm afraid. We've run out of time. I'll be back again with another show sometime, not next week, but the week after that. So until next time, keep your eyes on the stars.
Pay close attention. Pay close attention. Pay close attention. I'll take your brain to another dimension.
You're listening to www.p